Welcome once again to a January 6th edition of the OBX Wave Report, where we tend to discuss all things waves, weather, climate, and beach lifestyle. For this one, for January 6th, we are doing a bunch of reports to help honor democracy and democracy defense today. And I wanted to talk about something that is actually very local to the Outer Banks. And oftentimes, when we talk about the Outer Banks, we talk about in the context of flight, we talk about the Wright brothers and how basically a couple of bicycle mechanics were able to pioneer the invention of the airplane, which ushered in a century of flight across the globe and arguably segued with the advances in rocketry that helped to open the frontier of both our airspace and our space, our the space of our near planetary environment and the moon and the solar system for exploration. But we are going to talk about Billy Mitchell today and his vision for air power and how he helped to enable democracy defense across the globe in the 20th century and the 21st century, and how we can learn from visionaries like Billy Mitchell as we confront the climate crisis, because we need a similar vision for clean energy. And in my opinion, clean energy is not just a climate defense feature, it is also a democracy defense feature, particularly if democracies around the world get into rapidly manufacturing and producing supply chains for clean energy and relying on that to help support their economies, as opposed to being dependent upon dictatorial petrostates around the world. So let's talk a little bit about Billy Mitchell. I want to first talk about Billy Mitchell Airport, which is a well-known location for surfers here, and it's a main beach for surfers. Surfers tend to go to Billy Mitchell Airport beaches and enjoy the waves, particularly as they come up out of the south. Many of the surfers, though, don't either know or widely talk about the history of Billy Mitchell. I'm not going to speak for all surfers, but just generally speaking, I think that Billy Mitchell's history is something that we don't tend to talk about here in the Outer Banks, and I just want to talk about it a little more. Let's go into it. Let's talk a little bit about Billy Mitchell. So Billy Mitchell was born in 1879. He was a United States Army officer, served in the U.S. Army. I also served in the U.S. Army National Guard, although my service was much less illustrious or visionary. But I am honored to say that Billy Mitchell was also in the U.S. Army as well. Mitchell served in France during World War I, and by the conflict's end was the commander of all American air combat units in that country. After the war, he was appointed deputy director of the Air Service, which was the progenitor for the U.S. Air Force, and began advocating for increased investment in air power, believing that this would prove vital in future wars and in national defense. He argued particularly for the ability of bombers to sink battleships, and this put him in conflict with the governing philosophy of the U.S. Navy at the time, because the battleship commanders served as the major command structure for the U.S. Navy, and there was a negative reaction to the notion of air power in the US Navy that resulted in a major conflict between Billy Mitchell and the Admiralty in the US Navy at the time. This conflict focused around a demonstration in which bombers were used to sink old retired battleships off the Outer Banks of North Carolina in a famous demonstration that occurred during the early 20th century, in which air power was used to sink battleships that some claimed were unsinkable. And we know the story of an unsinkable ships. There's really no such thing as an unsinkable ship. But what this demonstration showed was that battleships were extremely vulnerable to air power, and that the ability to project force over oceans and over land began to reside more and more in aircraft. And so Billy Mitchell was a major visionary for the development of air power, the development of aircraft carriers, and the later development of strategic and tactical fighter and bomber wings for the US Air Force. And arguably the main strength of US military power in the mid to later 20th century and early 21st century has resided in our ability to project power through airspace and through space. Namely, one of the main deterrents right now in Europe preventing Putin from attacking NATO, even now as he attacks Ukraine, is the ability of NATO to project power through a massive force of thousands and thousands of aircraft. And in this way to deter attacks against democracies in Europe and across the North Atlantic. And so this ability to deter attacks and to defend democracies through the projection of air power, in many ways we can trace all the way back to Billy Mitchell. And in some respects, the victories that the US saw in the Pacific through the projection of air power, particularly through carrier air wings, can also trace back to Billy Mitchell's original vision. And so why am I talking about this as far as like for January 6th? Well, one, we've recently been reminded of how precious our democracy is and how fragile it is and how we can lose it. And I believe that Billy Mitchell, in his service to this nation, also recognized to some degree how we needed to forge ahead with new technology to defend our democracy. And he helped to pave the way for air power in that. And we also right now have the opportunity to be visionaries like Billy Mitchell from the standpoint of clean energy as we confront climate crisis. We can decouple ourselves from dependency to hostile foreign states, many of them dictatorial and anti-democracy, and forge our own path for clean energy, particularly if we come to lead and dominate the clean energy field. And many of the tools for accelerating US clean energy competitiveness have been laid down, but in my opinion, we need to do more. We need to form a picture for Western democracies to dominate the new energy structures in clean energy and to use that to shore up and defend and advance democracies around the world. And the nice thing about this is we do not have to engage in warfare to do this. We can do this through an economic system and through investments in clean energy and clean energy supply chains for raw materials for clean energy. The thing, though, that we need to do is make sure that we have unity in our political systems in order to do that, and we have clarity of vision, and that we're able to overcome the naysayers and the detractors. And again, Billy Mitchell does provide us with a bit of a lesson here. Sometimes visionaries get taken down by the detractors, and unfortunately, Billy Mitchell got into a tit for tat kind of argumentation with the detractors to air power. And through that tit for tat, he kind of lost his cool a little bit and individually lost his status, although his personal sacrifices in advocating for air power advancement for the US military, for the US Army, and for the US Navy did survive as a visionary force. And ultimately, the Admiralty were able to take down Billy Mitchell. They did not take down his vision. And it does show you how sometimes a visionary can start a process of change. And even though the visionary themselves may suffer as a result, that vision for change will can tend to continue. It doesn't necessarily happen in all instances, but it is a lesson that we can learn as we work to advance clean energy as a response to climate change. So a January 6th special edition of the OBX waiver report for you guys, talking about Billy Mitchell and democracy defense in the form of projecting and advancing air power in the early 20th century, and also talking about a link, a caveat link with clean energy and our need to rapidly advance a vision of rapidly expanding clean energy for the future, both to defend democracy and to defend our climate here on the earth, and to defend our life support systems and to keep earth vital and rich for all people and for all democracies. So thank you for joining me again, and please do everything you can to help support the vision of a clean energy future for the United States, both to defend our coastlines and to defend democracy.